It's my honor to introduce Representative Jim Schmidt. Representative Schmidt has represented constituents in District 31 in Morton County since 2011. He's got a career in water resources at the USDA. He's the go-to guy for water funding and water policy. And he also serves on the Morton County Water Resource District, which I believe is one of the only water resource districts that provides water supply. Please correct me if I'm incorrect. And then he also serves on the Missouri West Water Systems Board. And so Representative Schmidt, very happy to have you.
Well, thank you, Jack. I'm assuming you can hear me. Hello?
Yes, we can hear you, Jim, and I should mention, Jim, Representative Schmidt? We're good. Gotcha.
Yeah, I'm here.
I should have mentioned to everybody that the reason you're joining us by phone is because he's fencing today.
Yeah, and we have to go. We're in town right now because we ran out of supplies. So anyway, we're doing a lot of listening, or at least I'm doing a lot of listening right now. And to let you know where we kind of are in the process is, obviously the House has the State Water Commission budget first. And my conference committee is Representative Tracy Bowe and Representative Dave Munson. And on the Senate side, they've got two changes. Gary Lee is gone, as is Larry Robinson. And so the replacements are for Larry Robinson is Senator Heckman, and we're not sure exactly who is going to replace Senator Lee. But at this time right now, Senator Sorbog and I are doing a lot of discussing back and forth with regards to the 21-23 budget. We're not engaged at all in the 19-21. So that is obviously lies with the State Water Commission and the Office of State Engineer staff. Our concern right now, as he and I are talking this morning, as with the Lieutenant Governor, as you're probably well aware of, that there's an effort on bonding. And there's basically two efforts out there. One is that Senator Wardner and a number of House members have to bond a number of items for a grand total of $900+ million to be bonded. Then the other one, of course, is the governor's bonding effort. I think it's what, $700 million into the revolving loan fund. I would suspect that in the House, and I'm not sure where Senator Wardner's bonding bill is going to go. It is being sponsored by Representative Porter, so it will start in the House first. I would imagine that that bill would go to full appropriations and not one individual division. So that's an unknown right there. I would estimate that the entirety of Senator Wardner's bill will not come out that way of appropriations. My colleagues recognize that some bonding is needed and can be utilized. However, folks, at this point in time, everything that's there is just being proposed. With respect to bonding for water projects, Senator Wardner's bonding bill, as some of you are well aware, is roughly $400 million. I think that's going to be changed before it is being submitted as a bill. I don't know what that number is. And I've had 6 different conversations with Senator Wardner on that number. And what makes it difficult is we've got so many variables. One number that I'm concerned about and we really need a good handle on is the amount of money that we're carrying over. Earlier, several months ago, that number was anticipated to be somewhere around $360-some million. So we've got a long ways to go before we really can finalize that number. So I'm going to be reliant heavily on Heidi DeLorme and the Office of State Engineer to give us a really good carryover number. I also think that it's difficult for us to go to the taxpayer and say we're going to borrow money for water projects when we're sitting on 367 or 300 and some $1,000 million worth of carryover. So we've got that kind of cash in the bank waiting for projects to be done. And there's been some discussion amongst my colleagues with regards to the amount of money that's being carried over year to year to year by projects. We understand that in some scenarios that does have to occur. However, when you start carrying over that kind of money, it does raise some issues. So that's an unknown as well. The other unknown that we have has to do with the large 3 projects, Red River, Minot, and Fargo. As you know, Fargo has not opened their P3 bids, and I was informed that just recently the courts have dropped the lawsuit from the Buffalo Water Resource District, so that no longer exists. And we're certainly hoping that the Diversion Authority can open their P3 bids before the State Water Commission budget leaves the House. And at our last Water Topics Committee meeting, it was mentioned to Mr. Paulson that chances of having any additional funds to the diversion out of the House, if the P3 is not there, is close to 0. Mr. Paulson was then informed by Senator Holmberg that if it's close to the end of the session and we're in conference committee or close to conference committee on the State Water Commission budget and they come in with a request for P3, it's probably not going to be honored. So they're trying to get their P3 bids in and known to us before the State Water Commission budget leaves the House. So that's another unknown that we have. That makes it quite difficult to figure out if we are going to bond water, how much to bond. As some of you are probably well aware, it was the 17-19 biennium where Representative Straley and myself established a $200 million line of credit with the Bank of North Dakota to help finance some of the projects. At the end of that biennium, we never touched one nickel of that $200 million. We didn't need to. So there's some concern about you can't spend money faster than you can turn dirt, or you can't spend money faster than the local entities come up with their cost share dollars. So bottom line for us right now, when I say us, that would be Senator Sorvog and myself, and we no doubt will be the 2 that put this budget together. Is that we're just doing a lot of listening. My name is not on any of those financial bills at this time. And so there's a lot of variables that I think will have to play out during the session. The other thing I'm trying to do is put off the State Water Commission budget in the House appropriations for as long as feasible, to allow for some of these other variables to solidify. And once they are, then it'd be a lot easier to move forward. So there's a lot of moving targets. And from the senator and my perspective, we're trying to do a lot of listening rather than making predictions as to where it will be and then dealing with it when the session comes. So Lance, I'd certainly entertain some questions with regards to that bonding issue, if there are any.
Thank you. And I should mention to you, Representative Schmidt, that Senator Wardner and Senator Sorvog both joined this convention last Friday, and so talked a bit about that. And we also had highlights from State Engineer Paskowski about what he knew about the governor's proposal. So this convention crowd has talked about these ideas, and so we're glad that you're engaged in those conversations as well. There's always some concern
and we are, Lance, and I don't have any answers right now. I really don't. I just trying to gather, what are our real true needs? Why are we carrying over some money? Can we take the carryover money that we have and transition that to cash for the projects that are coming forward and then using a line of credit with the Bank of North Dakota for those projects that would be under the carryover. And then once that line of credit with the Bank of North Dakota reaches, say, $200 to $250 million, then the Bank of North Dakota would bond to cover that. And I've had that discussion with Kelvin Hewlett. So we're trying to also transition into spending cash rather than trying to spend off a credit card, which has kind of put us in the predicament we have now. So a little bit more insight, Lance, to the folks.
Sure. Well, there was spending or allocating funds that are anticipated in the future certainly creates a challenge, as we all witnessed this summer while the State Water Commission had to hit pause throughout the whole summer. But in the meantime, as you highlighted, there was 300 billion plus of cash, but it had all been committed to projects. And so it's certainly a cash management and cash flow challenge that'll need to be addressed. And one of the topics you've mentioned is to build up those cash reserves, and you work on a cash basis, but that seems to me would create a even bigger carryover as projects take sometimes years to accommodate or to accomplish. And so if we operate on a cash basis, couldn't that get to be hundreds of millions or $1 billion waiting for projects to get done until we send out the checks when their phases of them or the projects themselves are completed?
Well, that goes back to in previous session, we came forward with the 4-year carryover. And I think we need to be tougher on that. And so that we aren't sitting there with cash in the bank, and that's where we are now. So we got cash in the bank. Meanwhile, we're betting on the come, and we've got to come up with a better solution. And so there's a number of those solutions that are out there, Lance, and you're always going to have carryover. That's always going to be there. We can't avoid that. That's just the nature of the beast.
And I think
so how do we best handle that?
Yeah, and the people on this,
I'd much rather have something on there. Go ahead.
I was just going to say the people in this audience certainly understand that projects take time to accomplish, and that we have the best objectives and best goals, but permit issues, legal issues, unanticipated conditions all make projects take longer to deliver than we hoped. So there's no criticism here of the carryover. It's just the fact we often end up defending that as a water community. Why is there so much just waiting? And because these projects are hard and complex, and sometimes they take a while to implement. So we get it. We need some help explaining it to the rest of the state policymakers why that builds up, and sometimes it looks like a lot of money not being used when it really is promised to somebody, and folks are planning to spend it and working to spend it.
Working to spend it is a better idea than planning to spend it. If we're planning to spend it, I don't want cash sitting there. Working to spend it is a different thought. May be the same result, but a different thought anyway, Lance. So again, if you all got some thoughts, I'm more than willing to hear them.
Does anyone have any questions? And maybe if you send them in the chat message, Representative Schmidt can't see that, but Jack or I could sure repeat those questions if anybody has any. Certainly, we're excited about your total engagement on water projects and your intimate understanding in many cases of the timing and the aspects of those needs and the scale of these projects. We're excited about the proposals, and albeit with bonds, and we know that it might be a little more of a challenge in the House of Representatives, which is traditionally a more conservative body. Might there be some appetite? You've already talked about that you're gathering information, but not to speak for your 93 colleagues, but is there a possibility of getting some degree of bonding through the House?
I think there is. I just don't know how much and for what. I think it was an accomplishment just for us in the House to say, yeah, we think we need to do some bonding, or yeah, we need to do some bonding. That was a huge accomplishment in itself. If I may, Lance, briefly about Red River Valley Water Supply Project. We've had a discussion with Dugrain DeCray and Senator Wardner and Representative Pollard and that stuff, trying trying to get that project as far along as we can. I think one of the restraints, if you will, and I guess maybe that's not a really good word, but is the local match. And that basically is going to come from the three entities, Fargo, Cass Rural Water, and Grand Forks. And I believe 84 to 86% of this project benefits those three entities, whereas the remaining then is something that the rural entities and rural water and communities might be interested in using. For those that you're not aware, the construction cost share through the legislative earmarks, if you will, is 75% state, 25% local. So the big thing in my thoughts with the Red River Valley water supply as moving forward is totally dependent, well, in most part, dependent upon the 86% that are using it, having the local match to come up with that. Now, we were told that they could spend about $200 million turning dirt this coming biennium, and that would be great if we had the money. But my first question to Mr. DeCray was, okay, that's great, but out of that 200 million, 50 million's got to come from the big three and the rural folks, and is that there? And Dwayne thought, well, it probably would be there. Well, I made an inquiry to the city of Fargo asking if that's what they want, because that's a little different than what they've been telling us. Their focus obviously is on the diversion, along with their local cash money for the diversion. So that was on the table. I haven't heard back from the city of Fargo whether or not they have that local match for Red River. So that's, we're trying to, we've got the 13 million, then we had the other 30 million, and now they're asking for 50 million. So that's going to be tough to get that total package for them, I believe. And that's the other part, folks, that's what's difficult right now is what is the forecast going to be for revenues for the Resources Trust Fund? On a side note, last week I attended an Energy Council meeting, and the Energy Council is started in the late 60s. It's all of the energy producing states plus 2 Canadian provinces, and that energy has to do with fossil fuels and coal. Includes such states as Oklahoma, Texas, Alaska, et cetera, et cetera. And at that meeting this last weekend, there was a real strong effort on the behalf of the Oklahoma petroleum industry. They're extremely concerned about what's going to happen to oil, as is Texas and some other states. Now, those states that don't have a real, like for example, the center of the Bakken, where your return of your ROI is quite high compared to the peripheral. A lot of the states don't have that sweet center, as does Oklahoma, does not. And so they're concerned that they may lose a lot of oil revenues because of the new administration. How much does that play into our forecast for North Dakota? I do not know. But that's obviously a variable that we're going to have a difficult time with, I believe, which means the 20% in the oil extraction tax may be a lot less than what we thought.
Well, that's a great segue. Thank you for that. The concern, of course, has been demonstrated a lot this summer with the fact that you had a forecast after your 2019 session in excess of $400 million for water funding and the Resources Trust Fund. That dropped to 270-some million later with the drop off in oil price and production. And now the recent forecast for the next biennium, I think, dropped another 13 or 14 million for the budget cycle you'll be working on in the 21 session. So it is certainly flattening. We have less than 15 rigs operating now in the West. So is it time, or maybe past time, for us to explore additional dedicated revenue sources? Bonding is what we point to easily, but how can we help as a water community figure out how we don't get so addicted to oil as we seem to have been, and how the ups and downs have caused a real challenge for us?
And it is, and I there are some other opportunities. However, they're quite limited with funding as well. I really don't have an answer for that, Lance. I really don't. I wish I did, but I do not. Granted, we've got a lot of effort into the oil 20%. I've even had some constituents in my district recently, within the last week, question the fact that we're putting too much money into the Resources Trust Fund out of oil that should go to other interests and other infrastructure in the state of North Dakota. And my response was, well, if you think that's the case, have somebody put forth a bill that reduce the 20% to something less, and we'll see how that works. I did inform my constituent that I would not support that. So I don't know how widespread that is in North Dakota, thinking that we've got too much oil money going into water and should be going somewhere else for infrastructure. I do not know. That just has come from a couple of my constituents. So, Lance, I just don't have any real handle on that. I can tell the folks that we did have the revolving loan fund and Resources Trust Fund, and it was about $26 million. It is totally used. And I have a bill that takes a program out of the Bank of North Dakota that was used for water infrastructure, but it was a 3% loan. Wasn't being used in the last 3 years. It was to be capped by legislation at 20-some million, I think 25, and they're at 36 million. And so we're going to take that program and add those dollars, the 36 million to the 25 that we already have. So we should have about $62 million in the revolving loan fund. And my goal, before the Lord takes me out of the legislature, is I'd like to see $100 million in that revolving loan fund, if we can, for our local entities to use that as part of their matching dollars, and keep sustaining that, because I think sustainability could be very difficult coming from the oil fields. So that's about the only way that I've got right now that we're actively pursuing and trying to incorporate into the process to increase that revolving loan fund.
Sure, and access to those local funds are definitely helpful, as the local cost share is a key part of leveraging the state funds for water through the Resources Trust Fund. So both tools are certainly critical to water projects. One thing I have emphasized for water resource managers, even at the rural level, is the concept of helping these major projects through other sources like bonding or otherwise. Fargo, Moorhead flood control, Service River flood control, Red River Valley water supply means that it could potentially free up more of those State Water Commission cost share dollars for some of the more rural projects that have kind of been backburnered in the last few years because of the major demands for these huge flood control projects. So I think there'd be support, both urban and rural, for helping find some other revenue streams for major investments that the state has put in place. I have a texted question from you.
That would be nice.
So anyway, I don't think there'd be a urban versus rural thing. I think it should be, we should all support the investments that you're looking at. I have a question that was texted
Lance,
me about.
I don't view. If I may interrupt you real quick, like Lance, I don't view water as a political issue. I don't view it as an east-west. I don't view it as a rural-urban. I view it as a North Dakota issue, because every one of us needs it. Some of us need more than others. I recognize that. Some of us have got more money to pay for it than others. We recognize that as well. But it's not a partisan issue. It's not a east-west. It's not a rich-poor. It's a North Dakota thing, and we need to approach it together, and try to balance it and move forward that way. So anyway, back to your question, Lance, please.
Oh, we agree entirely, and thanks for highlighting the fact that it's not a partisan or not a regional issue. That it's really investing in ourselves is the approach that these water leaders and water champions remind ourselves. In fact, we just, right before you were able to join us, we spent a half an hour learning about the water education efforts. So we try to get that same enthusiasm or that same recognition to the younger generations about the stopping taking it for granted, but understanding the value and importance of maintaining this infrastructure. The question I've got is, there's been some talk of
Sure.
reorganizing the office of the state engineer, maybe be set up a little bit differently than it presently is. It's got a split role now with both the regulatory aspects and with respect and drainage and permitting and so forth, water permits, but also has, of course, the role that we focus on with money and distributing the cost share grants and so forth through the appointed State Water Commission. Are you willing to talk about your ideas there?
Sure, I'd be more than happy to. Okay, what promulgated this is that Garland Erbely and I talked a lot, and it seemed as he always had a lot of things, a variety of things throughout the day that he was working with, and then, as you know, as we progressed through that, we were starting to have issues with respect to what's in the State Water Commission budget, what isn't in there, what's carryover, what isn't carryover, where's the money, how much money do we have? And we were having a real difficult time following the money. And so a couple of us got together, my colleagues, and we started thinking about, is there some way we can make this a little bit better and easier? So what came out of some of those discussions was a reorganization of the Office of State Engineer, and nothing to do with the State Water Commission, purely the Office of State Engineer. And when you take a look at all of the things that state engineer is responsible for, as we have it written here, I think either we got to find a super person or we got to start paying a hell of a lot more money, because I don't know how you can do all of those things as a state engineer and then be responsible for $960-some million, public affairs, and human resources. And so what I did is I wrote a little 3-paragraph scenario. And what it was is we keep the state engineer as the state engineer, giving all of the authority of engineering to that position. We have a director of the Office of State Engineer who would then directly supervise the state engineer, directly supervise the CFO, Chief Financial Officer, Human Services, and Public Affairs. And in that light, what that position would then be is function very similar as the Commissioner of DOT, Panos, does. Very politically astute, very upcoming with public relations, whether it be international or interstate, or with legislators or with local entities such as water boards, cities, etc. And basically be the forerunner of negotiations and public relations. And that position would not require being a professional engineer. So when I drafted the 3 paragraphs, and I gave it to Claire, and that's from Legislative Council, she came back and I said, geez, it's taking you a long time to draft that. She said, well, Representative, it's 128 pages long. And I've read that 128 pages twice. When you read that document, where the state engineer is involved is in a magnitude of different areas. And so once I got that from her, I called Garland and I reviewed it with him. And I said, how the hell did you ever do all these things? And he said, it's extremely difficult. So when I reviewed with him, what the thought was is having a state engineer focus entirely on engineering and appropriation, the water allocations and permitting, and that's those factions of engineering, and taking away the running of the money and human service and that stuff. He said that is very similar to what's the case is in South Dakota. And so that's kind of summarizes where that started and where it is right now. And it's drafted. It's been with a number of my colleagues. The support for doing that is quite high, I would say. So we will continue to pursue that. So Lance, that pretty much summarizes where it is, but the dollar figures of 900 and some million now is a lot more than what it was, say, in 2002 to 2007.
Representative
So
Schmidt, this is Jack. Representative Schmidt,
Yeah.
just to follow, is that bill drafted and is that being dropped in the pile?
It is drafted, and it's just been drafted and sitting on with several of my colleagues. We have not done anything with it. To this point, actually, it's on 2.0 is what it is. We have not done anything further. I've been waiting for a couple of other my colleagues to make comments, but they seem to be fine with the way it is. So that's where we have it now, Jack.
Right, I received a question from a water manager. Go ahead.
Go ahead. No, go ahead, Jack.
Okay, I have received a question from a water manager, and it's relating to the buckets. If you recall, in 2019, flood control was separated into, I think, 3 different buckets. There was FM diversion, Mouse River, and other flood control. And did that work well in your opinion? And do you see something like that happening again for 2021?
I've got a lot of years experience on earmarks at the federal level. And it was a small watershed project that USDA was running. And we in North Dakota have a tremendous amount of our flood control dams paid for by that program. Matter of fact, Morton County, where I sit, we've got at least 3 of them. What happened to that program is it died. And it died because of earmarks. And what we end up with earmarks is we end up putting cash to the side specifically for that project. The project likes that because the guarantee of dollars is there. If you're somebody that doesn't have an earmark and you see that money sitting there, just sitting there, specifically for that project, and it's not being spent, you got to wonder why in the hell is we doing it? I can tell you that after the 2017 session, Gary Lee and I said, we're going to try to do away with earmarks and keep it in the bucket and let the State Water Commission and the Office of State Engineer and the entities deal with what's in the bucket. And if the bucket is short, come to budget section to move money. Well, that ain't going to happen. So we ended up with the earmarks to Minot, Red River, and Fargo. For them, it's a good thing because they know the money's there. For the rest of us, it's not such a good thing. I'd prefer to stay away from earmarks as much as we possibly can. But that's not the reality of the world, Jack. That doesn't always happen that way. So it depends. It's a good thing depending upon who you are. It's a bad thing also depending upon who you are and where you sit. Comments?
I don't have any comments, just appreciate the answer. Are there any other questions from our membership?